Warning. The following scenes may contain references to power pages and portals which some listeners may find disturbing, especially if you've struggled with poor training in the past. Hey all, Franco Musso here. Yes, I've hacked your podcast feed. I've held John and Mike hostage, but don't worry, I got my wires crossed and I'm actually paying them a small ransom in the form of sponsorship. Anyway, big announcement. I'm finally releasing my online Power Pages course. This has been 5 years in the making. It's tried and tested on citizen devs and portal makers all around the world. It's the course I wish existed when I was getting started. It's practical, it's hands-on, and it's project-based, so you're not wondering how the heck this would apply to the real world. I've built in battle-tested lessons I've learned from tens of successful portal projects across various industries, budgets, and geographies, and I've formulated the most efficient route from zero to heroic launch. The tools and techniques I've chosen to show you are all based on what adds the most value to you, the learner, and to your customers, all in the most compressed timeline possible. Think 80-20, focusing on the techniques that punch above their weight and deliver the majority of results. You'll get video lessons, a repeatable framework, and some super helpful worksheets. Visit francomusso.com/power-pages-course and register your interest. Disclaimer, this course isn't for you if you prefer hours of slides, theory, and little to no action. You can now take your fingers out of your ears and enjoy the awesome that is Sprint Zero.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Sprint Zero podcast. My name is Mike Gowland and I'm here with my co-partner rat in crime, John Russell. John, say hello.
Hi, and for Sam's benefit, I did actually wear the rat outfit for a little bit.
I think you should be wearing it throughout the whole episode.
Okay.
It's good for the socials, John.
Okay, cool. Can you hear me still though? It's quite difficult.
No, we can hear you loud and clear, mate.
The problem is
All
I can't.
good. All good.
Let me just put my glasses on.
Yeah,
Okay,
there we go. All right, today we are joined by Samuel Smith. Is it Samuel or Sam? What do you prefer?
Sam, all the way.
Sam, cool. Sam Smith is a Power Platform Solution Architect at HSO. He is 11 times Microsoft certified Power Platform consultant, developer, and architect who has a passion for continued learning and development. Since joining the Microsoft business application space, he has built innovative Microsoft business solutions across varying industry verticals. He enjoys exposure to enterprise-scale Power Platform across a wide portfolio of clients, ranging from healthcare, public sector, and professional services. Nice to have you on the show, Sam. Hello.
Hello. Yeah, nice to be with you guys.
Yeah, how are you doing today? You good?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. Just sort of over the last few days, sort of thinking, what am I actually going to talk about beyond the questions? I'm just going to let it flow. Streams of consciousness.
We'll get it out of you. Don't worry.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. It's all fine.
John, who said you could take the rat outfit off?
Well, I said because I like to be able to see my own eyes, and it was very off-putting. So if it was off-putting for me, it must be very off-putting for Sam. Bearing in mind this is probably the first time we've met actually, kind of virtually in person. So maybe a bit too much rat for now. Sam, it's really good to have you here. Like, I really appreciate you taking the time out. Like what we normally always do is we normally ask the first question is just kind of how did you get here? How did you get into the Power Platform space?
This is a long drawn out story, as I think it is for most people. I haven't met anyone so far who's come out of university and sort of said, I want to be a Power Platform developer. It's amazing, like diverse range of backgrounds we all come from. It's kind of the same as how I got into technology, to be honest. So I worked as an opera singer throughout my 20s, came from a very artsy background. Although as a teenager, I would be sort of messing around with JavaScript, HTML, and languages I couldn't really get.
Hold on 1 second. You said opera singer.
Yeah, I was going to say.
We need to go. We need to go back to that bit.
Way back.
We do.
Yeah. No. So I basically worked as so I did a pretty artsy degree in music, sort of academic music. I'd always been really passionate about music, everything. Although we on the way on holiday to Cheltenham a few days ago, my wife had to endure all the way from Rage Against the Machine on my playlist of light songs, all the way to Lohengrin, Wagner, Mozart, and then Miles Davis jazz. So I got really eclectic. But I've always, basically passionate about music, and yeah, I was really lucky to kind of live out my vocation as an opera singer for about 10 years. So I worked as a freelancer in London, sung as a soloist at the Royal Opera House, and then worked in Germany for a couple of years, which was a bit of a journey. And then, I came out of being an opera singer. I had a few sort of health issues, and kind of it was kind of like I couldn't really sort of continue as a singer. So I kind of came to the end of that thinking, what cross-transferable skills do I have from opera to anything else? Turns out very few. So I sort of thought about what I wanted to, do with the rest of my life. And I'd originally thought about being an English teacher, being a music teacher. And whilst I was thinking about those things, I kind of thought, right, I should probably think of some way to pay the bills. So I sort of did, I think what quite a lot of people do. So went and did a little bit of recruitment, fell into IT recruitment. And then specifically, this was kind of like back in 2018, 2019. And I was just, reading up and I did a few Microsoft certifications around Dynamics 365 CE because that's what I was recruiting in. And then, I was lucky to be offered a job at one of the consultancies I was recruiting for. And then, just all started through that space. So, I did a few months as a functional consultant in D365 CE. And then I was very fortunate, and it was a real kind of, it was a real kind of break point in my career, to be honest. So I got offered a job as a Power Platform consultant straight into, developing Canvas apps for right in the middle of all the joys of COVID and all of those kind of applications that we all had to build. It was a little bit of a long, convoluted story, but that's kind of how I arrived here.
Nice. And obviously, I don't know why I wouldn't know that or would know that, but it's very interesting that you're an opera singer, or were an opera singer. What kind of transfer? Are there any transferable skills from opera singing into the Power Platform?
There's obviously limited ones. Being able to sing a given aria isn't particularly helpful. But I do think for things like demoing and kind of those kind of pressure scenarios, that has been very helpful. And I think, again, just sort of where there are definitely things in terms of how you learn things and sort of learn new skills. To train to be an opera singer, you need to be able to sing, not be necessarily actually fluent in these languages, but be able to kind of obviously assimilate what the word for word meanings are, be able to transliterate Russian, all of these kind of like different factors. And so I think my kind of framework, I guess, for learning new skills, that was very helpful, because obviously I came into it and I've been messed around with websites and a little bit of like very, very simple C programming as a teenager, but then coming into thinking about doing it as a job is obviously a completely different kettle of fish. So I would definitely say it helps for when you've got maybe like quite a pressured demo to give as in pre-sales, for example, or sprint reviews and all of those kind of things. But I think it's more maybe patterns of behavior that have been helpful, I would say, than anything else.
So is that sort of how, I guess that it gives you the confidence with public speaking as well, right? So you're giving presentations, whether it's over Teams or in person, and that stint of being an opera singer probably plays into a lot of that, right? Because you're getting up in front of a large audience and singing a language you may not even know.
No, exactly. I think that's the thing, isn't it? I kind of like feel and don't get me wrong, there's been times in my software career where I've been incredibly nervous, but you sort of, I think it's more that you've been to those places before, and you can kind of think, right, I can sort of use that energy in a positive way, which is really, really good. But I would say that's the thing, and I guess kind of how we interact with clients and how we present information, all of those kind of things. I think it's definitely been helpful.
Yeah, I think what you just said there is really interesting. Like when you've been through that situation before, or a situation like that before, it's like your mind and your body have been able to process that maybe emotional response, so that when you are in that situation again, you can subconsciously deal with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes it's a confidence thing of proving to yourself, I can, I don't know, sort of interact with a situation and it's going to be fine. And I think also sometimes an experience is one of those things that it can be a double-edged sword, where you can sometimes narrow your kind of field of view for the possibilities of how you solve a problem. But at the same time, sometimes where it is just, it's quite difficult, being on autopilot to a certain point can be really helpful. It can get you through those tough spots.
So we mentioned at on your intro that you've got 11 Microsoft certifications. How have you found the new addition to the applied certification exams? And do you find that they're more useful, better, or worse than the let's say the previous? They're still valid, aren't they? The current certification system.
Yeah, I found them to be a little bit too simple. So I think the sentiment behind going to applied skills is correct. And I think that gets away from potentially people going through, whether you're being trained up by a partner or you're an end user and you're just, coming into the technology and you need to sort of, learn how it all fits together. It is good that we're testing whether people can actually perform these, configuration tasks, etc. That is a good thing. But what I would say is that they're not really anywhere near being able to test people's knowledge of the platform in any way, shape, sense, or form. So, for example, and I'm going to put aside all the issues I think that everyone's had with VMs crashing out and it just not being a particularly good interface for people to have an exam within. But yeah, they just obviously, to me, they're just nowhere near complex enough. And I totally get from Microsoft's point of view is that we want to kind of invite people into the space, but there needs to be, I think, some level of being able to say, actually, this is the minimum standard for me to kind of say this person is certified to be able to do these actions. Because at the moment, I wouldn't gain any confidence if someone came, sort of, let's say, applied to HSO and said, I passed this applied certification. To me, at this moment in time, that means nothing to me in terms of putting them into a live project. So yeah, I get the sentiment. I think it's good, but I do think the previous exams, although fraught with issues, I think everyone had to study a lot harder for them. And yes, it doesn't, in terms of sort of how different people's brains works, it's not necessarily the easiest thing for everyone to pick up upon. It's just a really long, convoluted answer. So yeah, basically, I think they do work, but they need to get a lot more difficult.
And do you think we could live in a world where we actually just have both, and actually there is no one or the other answer?
Yeah, I think invariably that would be better, because then you would still kind of reward people who, for example, maybe do find it difficult to just assimilate textual information and then interact with that kind of exam. But at the same time, there are just certain things which you need to be able to articulate in written form or through multiple choice to prove your knowledge of the platform, I think.
I mean, realistically, how would you do an applied skills or a solution architect, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it becomes so subjective at that point as well, I think. And it's again, it's more about the reasons behind your choices, I think, that actually are what makes a good solution architect, and the many, many different variables that you have to take into account to be able to get to a decent solution. That isn't to say I don't think like the training material by David and Julie Yack isn't exceptional, and it's really, really well written. It's some of the best learning paths I think that are on MS Learn for sure.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both, like you say, and I think a lot of our work is on the job experience as well, and it's just really the partner being upfront and honest about the consultant's level of skill level when they're employed on a project. I mean, that's kind of what I think about it. But yeah, I don't know if you agree with that, Sam.
Yeah, I think I think the transparency with clients is like, I mean, from my perspective, it's kind of like people are either going to find out the good way or the bad way with that kind of thing. And I do think I've seen in previous positions, people put onto live project positions where, as a result of passing some of these exams, it's kind of thought as, okay, this person can build Canvas apps, and away they go. And it's just, they don't have any idea, to be quite blunt, in terms of what they're actually doing, beyond those kind of happy path scenarios. So yeah, I think we could probably spend a whole hour just talking about the partner network and how people navigate that. But,
yeah. So I know you love a bit of AI, and so do we. And I saw your post about like the increase of that context window for Google's Gemini. I think one thing that I've really found about that, though, I found those. I don't know if you remember those videos that came out about Gemini, and they were kind of saying, look what this can do, and they are actually fabricated. And I mean, well, it could do it, but it couldn't do it at the speed that they were implying on the video.
Yeah.
That left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth, really, about Google's intentions in this space, and it brings into the discussion around ethical AI. Just fabricating that video, and it's not real. It's not real life. What do you think about that?
I think I agree with you. I do think, though, that the amount of pressure that they've been put under to come out with a product or to come out with an answer, and the amount of pressure that they would have had to do that is obviously huge. I'd love to have seen what their R&D budget was versus OpenAI's, for example, because I very much doubt it's any less. So yeah, I do agree with you. I think, again, like it's going to turn, and obviously being very much in the sort of Microsoft ecosystem, most of my all of my project work has been with Azure OpenAI. In my spare time, I do sort of messing around with local LLMs and Hugging Face models and just all of the other things, and Anthropic as well, which I think is also really, really good. Haven't played as much with the Google model, so I can't really say I could really comment as to how. I think, yeah, definitely in terms of Gemini, that was obviously a bit of a mistake. From what I read, it seems like the new Gemma models, that seems to be a little bit more transparent, and it's kind of like more in line with what they're releasing, for sure.
I mean, the whole fabrication of technology has been a problem for as long as technology's been a thing, and we've had to demonstrate technology to consumers, right? So there's all sorts of stories about CES conferences where they're demonstrating this like piece of hardware, but actually there's this whole like supercomputer sat underneath a table with a blanket over the top that somebody has to keep like pumping a foot pump to like make it keep going, or like blow air over something to cool it down. So
exactly right. It's all of the that kind of like the black tablecloth, isn't it? What's going on underneath? But yeah, I do find like the context window thing is in and of itself, I think, quite interesting, because obviously I think as these models get larger and larger and larger and larger, which is kind of like the natural path which we're going to just keep going on. There does come a point, I think, where these context windows obviously get so massive, where either it's going to come to a point where how we kind of program or we interact with these models, it's not going to be as a simple, for the most of the time when we're talking with a chatbot, for example, are we ever really going to get close to that million, apart from if we're just copying and pasting documents into it?
Yeah.
Like, probably not, right? And so and we're sort of, if you're getting into sort of like RAG, or sort of like retrieval augmented generation anyway, I do question kind of like whether how much we need that kind of context window, and kind of, again, like how kind of effective that actually is, because it kind of gets into whether you should be going down fine tuning and all of that sort of thing. And also, again, it's going to come into cost, I think, for most organizations. I think even as they are at the moment, I would say probably tokens are probably at a kind of an all-time low. And I think as adoption goes up, obviously the price is probably going to go up as well, as we all kind of get more hooked on these models. So yeah, I think the story of kind of like how we actually use less tokens and make sure that the things that we're feeding these models is as accurate or as relevant to what we get as possible, that's kind of the kind of avenue, I think, which we're probably going to be going in.
Yeah. And it almost this the whole like context window thing and tokens is all starting to become an arms race, isn't it? So you had like the console bit wars where they were going up in bits, and after a while it just became a meaningless number, and they just completely dropped it from their marketing. with processors, and it was all about the megahertz and the gigahertz, and it got to a point where it's like 3.2 is probably enough for most people. Like they're still going higher, but like it's not really. It doesn't have the same weight because actually it doesn't matter as much. And I want, and just like you said with the context window, it's going to go up and up and up. But actually, there's a point where like there's a lot we're just not going to use in day to day.
I think so, and as I said, I think it's kind of like an answer to retrieval augmented generation. The idea that you can just put everything you could possibly want, whatever, how long your PDF is, whatever, and you're not having to obviously then kind of go and chunk it up and find the bits and have all of that workflow going on. But yeah, and I think the other question for me as well is around kind of there's obviously the demand in data center technologies and kind of like how they're all going to have to scale over the next couple of years to kind of fulfill this growing demand.
Yeah.
And it, you sort of think from an environmental perspective as well. It's like, when you're interacting with a GPT-4 model, in the background, I know it's all magical to us on the front end, but somewhere you are interacting with something like 6 GPUs, something like that.
Yeah.
And it's, again, you're sort of thinking, it just feels in and of itself really inefficient to me. So I do like where, so some of the Microsoft smaller models like Phi 2 and Mistral as well, specifically, where they're doing a lot more with less, and the models are getting faster. And it's so again, I think they're a bit of a runaway train, and it's going to happen whether or not I moan about them right now. But I do really hope to see that as a general direction to kind of like better smaller models.
It's interesting you talk about the whole large language model thing as well with environmental concerns. Like, how do you power? Like, it's data centers going to get bigger and bigger. We're going to demand more and more. We have to power it, and those power requirements of the GPUs, they're not going down. I mean, if you look at like the 4090, I think you need a 1200 watt power supply just to run the thing, don't you?
That's
one.
That's just one. So like, and I would strongly encourage anyone, if anyone's got sort of like a gaming PC or something like that, and just because I think sometimes these LLMs sat in a data center, it just feels like this ethereal black box, and it's just magic comes out the end, right? And it's there's a very specific set of technologies that allow them to happen, but if you're, as I say, if you're interested in it and you want to just try some of these things locally as well. So I've got relatively sort of modest graphics cards, but I can load.
What you got? Come on.
I got 3060.
Oh, it's better than mine. I've got a 2070 Super.
Well, the 3060. So I loaded up LM Studio, which is a great kind of just a local Windows executable you can download, and then you can basically, it kind of will automatically filter out all of the Hugging Face models which it thinks your hardware can run. Mine with like the lowest parameters, sort of like the smallest Llama model, wasn't having it at all. So something like Phi 2, for example. But anyway, it's a really good sort of exercise to do is just open up your task manager and just see how much resource it's using, right? And you can it will just give you a bit of an appreciation of, as you were saying, when you're hearing the fans, just the energy that's going into every time you're, I don't know, asking for another, like, please compare the top 3 spaghetti bolognese recipes or whatever, right?
The other thing you can do is to go outside, go to your electric meter and just watch the numbers go up and just sit and cry.
Oh yeah, no, I've got a smart meter. So I've got one of those sort of like a smart meter, so I can just put it on top of my desk and just watch it kind of.
It's interesting because I think NVIDIA, I think it was a few months ago now, they sort of like not announced, but they suggested that actually they're not a gaming like graphics card company anymore. They're now an AI hardware provider.
Yeah, I think because it's interesting, isn't it? Because they probably went through everyone just buying it up for crypto mining. Yeah. That's kind of like slightly gone away now. But yeah, I mean, exactly. They're very much in the AI business.
Yeah.
Another one, if you again want to sort of play around with sort of hosting your models locally, NVIDIA released a RTX chat a couple of weeks ago, or it might have been a couple of months ago. But that kind of has a kind of, again, where you can run a kind of a RAG sort of model locally as well. It's also quite interesting to play around with.
Okay, I'm gonna have to have a look at that, I think, because I'm looking to do something like that myself at some point. But nice segue. Where do you see the future of generative AI going? Do you think we've just been talking about running local models on local hardware, right? But how far away do you think we are to having like a small language model just running on our phone?
I don't quite see that happening, to be honest. I think like as you're saying, if you're talking about kind of like your like a relatively decent graphics card really struggling, then I think with the state of them how they are now, I can't quite see that happening, to be honest. I think it's also the kind of products that are being put out there by whether we're talking about Copilot, whether we're talking about OpenAI, or we're talking about Anthropic. These are such compelling products, and all of the kind of the plumbing that goes around them. There's so much effort that's been put into that to make them as useful and as usable as possible. I see it more of kind of basically it becoming more productized as we go forward. I definitely see obviously LLMs are just going to get bigger and bigger. It's just going to be a sort of a fact of life. I think there's interesting points around sort of versus sort of like fine tuning, and where I think enterprises are going to get into more, hosting within their own network for sure.
Yeah.
So I've been working on an implementation where it's a lot of private endpoints, and the whole thing of it basically nothing can leave that virtual network in essence. And obviously in some industries, where the worry about that proprietary data kind of getting leaked and going into training a language model, it's just too high for them to absolve that kind of risk. So I definitely sort of see at the moment we've also, I would say for like the last year, we've been in this kind of MVP POC stage. And I think that step from going from just having a play around and kind of be able to say, yeah, that's cool, to a point where it's really useful and it's really kind of battle hardened. Obviously that's and I'd say probably really in the Microsoft ecosystem, it's only really Copilot that can go into that. The semantic kernel library, everything. It's so I wouldn't say like advanced, not the right word, but it's very very mature. For them to be able to kind of sequence actions and plugins together. But I think long term, we're definitely going to get into more kind of like autonomous actions. So I think the sort of human in the loop co-pilots that we have at the moment, as fantastic as they are, I think they have been sort of human in the loop because it's been a nice kind of way to introduce it to everyone's work.
Yeah.
Right? But how far we're away from where we're going to be getting a little bit more sort of like giving an assistant, co-pilot, whatever you want to call it, a task, and then it actually goes and executes it. I think that's going to be the sort of the next point. And there's loads of different frameworks to try, but the kind of thing of where, I mean, I sort of ran a version of AutoGen a few weeks ago, and it's absolutely terrifying, to be honest, when you sort of see, you give it a task, and when it's kind of like talking to itself, and it's, it'll kind of set up maybe 3 different instances of a language model.
Yeah.
And it will basically kind of just talk to itself, and it'll just be kind of like, for example, like writing a book about fishing, for example, you'll have the writer model, you'll have the reviewer, and you'll have like the project manager. And it's just this terrifying loop of kind of when it's talking to itself. So I think that kind of thing of them going from just being a knowledge, because I think at the moment it's a bit of like, it's more basically like a sexy knowledge retrieval for most people. But I think getting to the point where it's actually taking actions, and that's going to be.
And I think it's also about the transparency of that and what's happening in the background. I think people like Copilot is a good introduction to what the technology can do, but actually, as it matures, I think people will want to see what's going on in the background. Will want to know what's going on, and that increases that propensity for use, for considerations around data, etc., etc.
Well, I think your SecOps team will want to know, and I think your IT guys will want to know. But if Facebook's anything to go by, a lot of people would just share whatever they want and just not really give a toss.
I think it's true. I think there's going to be, to be honest, there's probably going to be the same predictable audiences as we have for other pieces of technology. But again, the risks for this and the ramifications are obviously, when you sort of hear about, I can't remember what the name of the model was, but there's been talk supposedly that the sort of the voice synthesis model that OpenAI have come up with, they didn't want to release it. And I don't know how much of that is just kind of wanting to build excitement for their product range. But Yeah, I think again we're so early doors that the only thing we can guarantee is that probably in like 2 years' time, the whole way we interact with these things is probably going to be completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you think that chat interface is going to change as well? Do you think that'll get old?
I don't know. First of all, I think it's going to be more pervasive, if anything, before it gets old. Because like, so for example, I've got to be careful working for the company that primarily is in the biz app space, but really, me going through a GUI and kind of going like, these are please, I don't know, go through these purchase orders and do this, this, and this with it, right? I do think there's going to be a lot more of those kind of tasks which we do say, actually, I just want to do it through natural language.
Yeah.
So I think there is a step for a lot of these kind of like point click applications where we are going to get to a point where I think it's just, a bit like the Project Sophia demo, for example.
Yeah.
That kind of thing where, you're just going to interact with natural language. And I don't know about you guys, but it's amazing how much one's workflow changes, and when you can just interact with natural language and how quickly you get to an answer. Even if we're just talking about like simple search, it's so much more. It feels much more natural as a user, even though we come from generation of Googling and kind of like better search terms and kind of being able to scan documents very quickly. So I just think that's going to be the next step. Whereas potentially, right, again, do you want to interact with your CRM or ERP through that traditional front end? My argument would be why in a couple of years' time. Again, I'm sure everyone at HSO is going to love me for saying that. But
I particularly love the voice chat feature of GitHub Copilot.
Oh, it's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's terrifying because we did a bit of a trial with it, and then whilst they were kind of deciding whether obviously to kind of invest in licenses, they turned it off. It was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. I was kind of like, I'm so much slower, and you get so used to it as a crutch. But
yeah,
I would say and this was something I was thinking about and kind of wanted to potentially raise, was around kind of like how we learn and how we kind of take on knowledge when we're using language models, because I don't know how you both have found it, but I find it can be very transient, the kind of knowledge you get, and you end up basically fixing the problem that's in front of you. But in terms of actually retaining that knowledge and actually retaining the, whatever thing you're trying to solve, right? It's very, very simple to just fix it incredibly quickly.
Yeah.
But I think it's so much more important now that, yes, you might have been able to kind of get the answer very quickly, but for you to kind of like actually take on what that problem was, and go through, normally when even if you're like reading loads of Stack Overflow articles, it sticks because you're spending a lot of time and a lot of pain to get through it. Yeah. So I think that would be my concern, is kind of, especially for, consultants, developers, is that you end up you obviously really widen your field of things that you can do.
Yeah.
To a point, but at the same time, it's all very transient, and you kind of have to repeat that knowledge and learning over and over and over again.
And something that I've been doing mostly with GitHub Copilot is actually querying the results.
Yeah.
And scrutinizing them as well, because sometimes I'll look at the code that's generated and I'll just read through it myself rather than taking it for granted. That whole element of, you have to check the results because you could take it into court and be completely wrong, right?
Yeah.
Just read through the results and just see if it makes sense to me. And if it doesn't, just ask. Just ask it, or ask something else, or ask, go to a search engine and try and collaborate that, and just see if it makes sense. And I found that's a good way to learn what it's trying to teach me anyway.
Exactly right. I think it's a quicker way to the answer, but also, let's face it, in a professional environment, if you're then going to stand up in a code review and say,
exactly,
I've made this choice because of this. I'm not be trying to. I mean, like the comments are a huge red flag. I've seen that a few times when you're kind of like, this is copied and pasted, because I can see the comment that it's so obviously from ChatGPT. But I think that's exactly right. And I think maybe it's that period of where you take ownership of the solution. That's the thing that I think people really need to pay attention to, or at least I feel I do, because as again, you might get to the answer a lot quicker, but at the same time, something that you're going to be happy to push into production that's got your name against it
and maintain it.
Yeah.
So actually, you still need to understand what the answer is rather than just taking the answer, right? And that's been true even when we were going through Stack Overflow articles and copying and pasting the code. You still needed to understand what it was doing and what was behind it and why that was the right answer.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's kind of just like that version. It's just that on steroids, I think, now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a section called Uncomfortable Corner.
Oh.
Oh, hang on, sorry. No. There we go.
Uncomfortable corner.
There we go. There's that extra £1 we spent this week. Nice. We've got this section called Uncomfortable Corner.
It's less than £1, John. Less than £1.
Oh, less than £1. Okay, all right.
It was 76p for 1,000 audio tracks.
We could get in trouble with Amazon now because they own Neighbours. The only reason I know that is because my wife watches it religiously. I don't.
So they own 90s Neighbours, though.
No, I reckon it's all covered under the trademark, though.
No one owns Harold Bishop.
Anyway, so Sam, when was the apart from now when we're talking about Neighbours, you can't use that. You can't use that one. When was the last time you felt uncomfortable, whether it was in or outside of work? And could you explain kind of how you felt, how you managed to get through it, and what maybe you would have done differently, or what you learnt that will help you through the next time it happens?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think my main sort of bits of being uncomfortable are normally to do with kind of weird self-imposed deadlines and sort of like the self-imposed sort of imposter syndrome sort of areas. And it's one of these things, I think, especially maybe because I've sort of come from although I've been in consulting a good few years now, prior to that, not coming from that background, the imposter syndrome and just kind of like assuming that you're wrong or that it can kind of lead to this kind of like hyper over preparedness for certain things, and that kind of the stress and sometimes anxiety that comes with that. So yeah, and again, I very much doubt that I don't think you have to come from a different background to feel that. I think most people in technology do, because you, especially I think as a paid consultant, as a client, I kind of expect you to know your stuff. But at the same time, this expectation that a feature that came out yesterday, that you all of a sudden have a great opinion on it and that you know how it's going to apply to my business and all that, that's, not realistic. So I think that kind of thing of like just expecting myself to know everything and then getting quite self-critical if I make a mistake or I don't know. So yeah, without sounding sort of like too lovey-dovey, I think just trying to be a bit more realistic with myself and just kind of like, yeah, just take the pressure off. And as I said, I think just turning around in the moment and saying, I don't know, and I think it's going to take me this amount of time to find it out, and being realistic, because I'm a sort of like a relatively quick learner and pick things up quickly. But at the same time, I know by doing that, I can put myself under a lot of stress doing that. So yeah, I'm definitely just trying to take a little bit more of a kind of slower, considered approach. I think that's definitely helping in the first instance.
I think it's quite hard, isn't it, Sam, when the technical landscape changes so fast, and yet you need to have that considered approach. The balance between those two is quite different, quite difficult.
I think so, and I think again, it's just when you're in it's as we all are on this call. I think you're put in positions where you're expected to have the answer all the time, pretty much, and that whether that's if you're in a code review working with a colleague that's looking for advice, or just a kind of you're in a scoping session. It's kind of like, oh, could we just not do this? those sort of things. So yeah, I think to be honest, from that side, I think I've really sort of tried to go for a bit more of a, as I said, a considered approach, but also being more focused on areas that, quite selfishly, that I enjoy. So, for example, I think especially for, across the Power Platform, there are so many different areas to it, and it covers a multitude of sins, from someone being a RPA developer to being someone who's fluent in C#, understands front-end development with JavaScript, web resources, etc. Someone who understands the various ins and outs of Canvas app syntax, Power Pages. I mean, it just goes on, right? And I think when I first joined the space, I kind of felt, well, I just need to be brilliant at everything. And that's just not realistic. And I think it's really important to find the areas that interest you, and that you sort of, that you're passionate about and you want to specialize in. So yeah, that's kind of it. That's definitely my aim at the moment.
Okay.
Nice. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think, it's a common topic on this podcast. When we ask about the uncomfortable bit, it usually is rooted in imposter syndrome. It comes up really frequently, doesn't it? And I think talking about it is one way to help, but also realizing your own abilities, I think, and everyone has something unique to offer and bring into this space that is, by definition different to everybody else, I think. And that is really down to your background and right the way back, I think, especially with how, you talk to people and build rapport with people, all that kind of thing, which I find quite interesting.
And I think we need to normalize saying, I don't know, and that being okay. Yeah. Because we are human beings, and Power Platform especially, you can't know everything.
Yeah.
And just because you're a Power Platform consultant, or just because you're a Power Platform solution architect, doesn't mean that you know every little in and out, intricate detail of every single part of that technology stack.
Exactly. And I think actually that brings me, I think there's another point I really did want to bring up, because I think with, when you're learning, especially when you're starting, I think it can be very easy to be very product led. And it's like, I need to know everything about this product. I need to know everything about this product. But as we've just discussed, it's ever changing. It's never going to stay in the same place. But your principles, like whether it's design principles or whether it's how you go about learning these things. And sometimes actually, it does come back to more like traditional software development, but those kind of principles will stand you in great stead for learning anything. And, it's one of those things. I'm a Power Platform solution architect, but at the moment I'm sort of spending less and less time with Power Platform and doing kind of more Azure-based components. But this is one of the things I do sometimes struggle with because I think in the community, we often get to a point where we're shouting loud and proud about our release wave for the sake of it being a release wave and a product release. And sometimes I just wish we were a little bit more realistic and sort of said, especially when we're talking with clients, because it's so easy to be sort of, and this is something my old boss, Andrew Welch, used to say a lot. It's like, just because there is a nail doesn't mean the right hammer for it is the Power Platform. And that means, and sadly, I think because for a lot of us, it's the technology that we're comfortable with, we take it to places it really shouldn't go to. And it's, I think it'd just be nice to just try and contextualize it a little bit more and sort of like basically say, yes, this is a really good sort of productivity-led low-code solution. Or in this situation, yes, we can use, I don't know, a model-driven app over many hundreds of thousands of records. Great. However, I want a really complex, beautiful-looking application that I'm going to run a great-looking chatbot interface over. Okay. Should you be looking into kind of like more of a kind of like a React web app, for example?
Yeah.
See, that's the kind of thing. I don't sort of like a generic rant, but I do sort of feel that it would be really nice to see more on LinkedIn instead of just look at this new offline mode capability. Relate that to something that's useful.
Yeah.
Instead of just kind of going the product for product's sake. I think that's one thing that really kind of turns me off to a lot of the posts, to be honest.
And it's interesting that because there's, especially with generative AI, it's been a real difficulty in actually like finding out what the real use case is, right? Or actual use cases. And you sometimes have, we've called it the Netflix problem before, haven't we, John? Where you've got so much choice, you actually get paralyzed by the amount of things that you could do with it because you don't even know where to begin.
Yeah, I think that those sort of things, I think, again, that to me is kind of like just belt and braces business analysis work in terms of the amount of times where, and I'm sure we've all been approached to do POCs where it's just, I want to do something with Gen AI.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, great, fantastic. I've been lucky to work on a use case in legal where, again, I think legal sector is like a dream scenario for, the kind of work that they do and, all of those kind of things. And again, I think, things like knowledge retrieval, that's a kind of universal problem that it obviously helps to fix. But again, sort of like relating it back to how much time are you saving an FTE, or sort of like full-time employee? How much, sort of like, is that person getting any benefit? Is their work going to be any better? Those kind of like what can be really boring KPIs to measure, especially when you're going to be talking about, this is how much it's going to cost you to run this. If you don't have those answers, obviously you're not really going to get beyond here's my lovely little POC anyway. Yeah.
Nice. Well, I think we've got to kind of the end of the episode now. Thank you very much, Sam, for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time. You can find Sam on LinkedIn. Links to the resources mentioned in this episode will be in the show notes. Music today was provided by Ken Like Fit, apart from the Neighbours 90s theme tune, which I don't know where he downloaded it from, some dodgy website. You can find Ken Like Fit's music on Spotify, the link to which you can find in the episode show notes. Additional music, well, I don't think you're going to put that link to Neighbours. Don't do that. So I'm just going to skip past that bit. So be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss the next episode. We'd also really appreciate it if you gave us a follow on LinkedIn. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please give us a review on your chosen podcast platform. Thank you very much. This has been Sprint Zero, and we've been Mike Gowland. Say goodbye, Mike.
Goodbye, Neil.
Goodbye, Lewis. And Sam Smith. Say goodbye, Sam.
Goodbye, Sam. So goodbye, everyone.
and I'm John Russell. See you on the next episode.
Bye. Love you, John. Love you, Sam.
Love you, Sam.
Warning. The following scenes may contain references to power pages and portals which some listeners may find disturbing. Especially if you've struggled with poor training in the past.
Hey all, Franco Musso here again. Quick update on that hostage situation. Hopefully the smell isn't coming across the airwaves. I haven't let the guys use the bathroom yet, so the joke's definitely on me. Anyway, big announcement. So, by popular demand, join me and a cohort of other budding portal makers for live coaching sessions, weekly live training, office hours, Q&A and surgeries. I'll guide you through the process from zero to launch, all at a fraction of the cost of hiring a freelancer or a contractor. It's like having a trusted partner on hand, helping you avoid the pitfalls, saving you a ton of money, headache and time. Plus, you're bound to learn lots from others in the group as we discuss their experiences, challenges and solutions. To apply, head on over to francomusso.com/group-coaching.